Ladies and gentlemen, Willa Allen.
Good afternoon, baseball fans. First, I want to congratulate the incredible members of the 2025 Hall of Fame class. And to Kelly and the family of Dave Parker, please accept our heartfelt condolence. Dave was a remarkable man and a phenomenal ball player. I know Dick would honor to share this moment with him. I also want to express our sincere thanks to James Forbes Clark, Josh, John, Whitney, Tom, and every member of the Hall of Fame team. You have made our families feel welcome, respected, and at home, and we will never forget that. On behalf of the entire Allen family, his brother Ron and wife Marthella, his sons Richard and Aaron, my button, his grandson Trey's mother Lasada, and my 11 siblings. We are so thrilled to be here today to officially celebrate the induction of Richard Anthony Allen into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. We called him Dick, and although he is not physically here to accept the honor, I assure you, he is with us. He is with the 350 family members and friends here today who have come to honor his life, his legacy, and the love of the game. And I know he is smiling right now, knowing that his story is finally being recognized in this very special way. To many of us, Dick was already a Hall of Famer, not just for how he played, but for who he was. Yes, he was one of the most natural gifted hitters to ever step into the batter's box, and who could forget his 40-ounce bat? But his statistics, impressive as they are, tell only part of the story, and I have hundreds of stories. There are moments he might have thought were small, but those moments left a lasting impression on the people around him. Dick didn't just give his time or his money, he gave his heart. Whether it was visiting a teammate in the hospital, or standing up for someone who didn't have a voice, or just writing a note to a fan, he was always there, quietly, strongly, and sincerely. Let me share a story that has always stayed with me, one that shows the kind of man Dick was. It was 1971, just after a game at Dodger Stadium. As Dick was leaving, a 16-year-old boy stood outside patiently waiting. As Dick walked by, the young man cried out, "Mr. Allen, can I have your autograph?" Dick stopped, looked at him with a familiar smile and said, "Son, I'd rather shake your hand." The young boy eagerly replied, "Yes, sir." What happened next turned into something unforgettable. They stood there, just the two of them, for 2 full hours. Dick didn't rush, He didn't wave him off. He stayed, he listened, he shared. That night, a friendship began. Dick often invited the young man to the clubhouse to meet the other players. On occasion, he brought him back to the ballpark to play catch in the bullpen. That season, Dick spent hours with him, showing him different kinds of food, introducing him to people he respected, even taking him to the racetrack to meet his horses and friends. He affectionately nicknamed the boy Baby Bruh, a name that young man still uses today when he speaks of Dick Allen. And now, over 50 years later, that once teenager is 70 years old and here today in Cooperstown to honor the man who changed his life with kindness. That was Dick. He was devoted to people, not just fans, but especially his teammates. If he heard someone was sick or going through a tough time, he'd turn to me and say, "Willa, they have to hear from us. Let's send a card or write a letter. We have to let them know we're here." He remembered everyone's birthday, not just the players, but their parents and their children. He knew the children's name, what sport they played, what their dreams were, and long after these teammates left the field, Dick would still talk about them, proud of their children who made it into basketball or basketball or music. He loved the game, but more than that, he loved the people in it. Baseball was his first love. He used to say, "I'd have played for nothing." And I believe he meant it. But of course, if you compare today's salary, he played almost for nothing. For Dick, the fans meant everything. He always wanted to show them, especially the young ones, that it's not about where you come from, but where you're determined to go. He came out of Wampum, Pennsylvania. It's a town with no more than 1,200 people, and yet Major League Baseball found him. When he was just a child, his teacher asked the class what they wanted to be when they grew up. Dick stood up and said, "I'm going to be a Major League Baseball player." Then he sat down. The other kids laughed because at that time, there weren't any black players in the Major League. But he didn't laugh. He believed it. And now, look at him. To the young players who came after him, Dick always tried to offer something more than advice. He wanted to give them perspective. He would say, baseball isn't a job, it's a gift, a tool to express your talent, a chance to enjoy the game, and a responsibility to do your best, not just to play, but to win. He was obsessed with understanding the why a game was lost, why a play didn't work. He always said, there's a game within the game. And he'll break it down with his teammates, helping them to see what others missed. He believed in lifting each other up and making the team better together. But Dick's heart extended far beyond the dugout. His favorite people at the ballpark weren't always the ones in the spotlight. It was the ground crew, the cooks in the kitchen, the clubhouse staff, the vendors, the custodians. Whenever we were invited to events at the ballpark, before we ever reported to where we had to be, he had to greet every one of them. He had to see all of them every time. And when he saw something wasn't right, he didn't stay quiet. If players of color didn't have proper supplies in the clubhouse, he spoke up. If a teammate wasn't paid fairly, he would say something. Once he even said, he told the manager, well, give them some of mine. That's who he was. He had a deep respect for elders, especially seniors. If he knew someone was living alone or just needed company, he invited them over for dinner, for the weekend, for a drive to a concert or a ball game. And sometimes he'd send me, most of the time. Back then, they were the same age I am now, so they don't seem so old. And the fans, the heartbeat of baseball. From Philly to Chicago, from St. Louis to LA, and the Bay Area to his hometown of Wampum, Pennsylvania, you stood by him. You cheered for him. You saw him even when the press didn't, even when the politics of the game were against him. You showed him he mattered, and he never forgot that. While Dick played for 5 major teams during his career, the Cardinals, the Dodgers, the White Sox, the Athletic, and the Phillies, there was no question about where his heart truly lived. Philadelphia was his favorite. He loved the city. He loved the energy, and most of all, yes, he loved the fans. When he returned to Philly in 1975, he told me that the 1976 team was the best he'd ever played on. It wasn't just a reunion, it was a homecoming. And the Phillies made sure he knew how much he meant to them, in a way that most players never experience unless they're already in the Hall of Fame. In 2020, under the leadership of John Middleton, the Philadelphia Phillies did something extraordinary. They retired Dick's number 15, a gesture typically reserved for those already in Cooperstown. But they knew, as we did, that Dick's legacy transcended technicalities. I'll never forget that day Mike Tolan called the house and said, "We need to speak to Dick. John is on the line." I put it on speaker. John said, "Dick, we're going to retire your number." Dick looked confused for a moment and said, "What number?" I jumped in, "Number 15. There was a long pause, and then he simply said, "Thank you. I really appreciate it." And that was it. No big speech, no long reply, just quiet gratitude. The Phillies moved quickly to make it happen on the 57th anniversary of his Major League debut. No one knew that Dick only had 4 months to live. Dick had a beautiful speech written with the help of Andy Woodley, but when the day came, he couldn't deliver it. The illness had quietly affected his body and his brain, and he was just too tired. But he stood up anyway and spoke from his heart, and honestly, that was more than enough. That day in Philadelphia meant everything to him and to our family. It was a moment we'll never forget. To see Dick recognized in that way while he was still alive. To feel the love from Philadelphia, the organization, and the fans, that was a gift. And even now, the Phillies continue to honor his life and legacy. I know Dick sees what you're doing, and he's smiling. To the Chicago White Sox, Dick found a place where he could truly express himself as a leader, as a teacher, and as a fierce competitor. Chicago embraced him not only for his talent, but for his heart. The love he felt from the South Side gave him strength to give 110% every game. And in return, he gave the fans one of the most iconic MVP seasons in baseball history. To the St. Louis Cardinals, Dick always said you were a first-class organization. Playing in St. Louis was an honor for him, especially because it meant sharing the field with one of his all-time favorite players, Mr. Bob Gibson. The fans in St. Louis were electric. Every time he stepped to the plate, the cheers made him feel like he could light up the ballpark, and most nights he did. To the Los Angeles Dodgers, Dick had a long dream of wearing that uniform. The Dodgers represented more than baseball. They represented courage, change, and history. Because of Jackie Robinson, because of the team's willingness to break the barriers, Dick always felt a connection to the Dodgers. Being a part of that legacy, even for a season, meant something deeply personal to him. And to the Oakland A's, though it came during the twilight of his career, it was still baseball, and Dick never took that for granted. Even though his team with the A's was brief, he cherished the friendship that were formed, the clubhouse conversation, and the opportunity to be part of a game he loved right up to the end. His story is not just about home runs or rewards. It's about principle, compassion, and wavering determination. That is what carried him through every challenge and every triumph. Today, his name is enshrined among the greatest to ever play the game. And I know beyond all the applause, Dick would want this moment to inspire others to play with passion, to live with heart, and to always be true to yourself. Thank you for honoring Dick. Thank you for believing in him, and thank you for finally bringing him home. Thank you.